Hi, I'm Jouke, and I host a software medical device meetup group, which I think is very interesting because I noticed that a lot of companies were struggling with going from a software world where things move fast and things break all the time, and that's okay because that's how you improve quality. But now they have to move to the medical device industry, heavily regulated, and things cannot just break because then people get hurt. So I have been organizing meetups about that, about specifically topics that I struggled with for about 4 years. This evening, we focused on the AI Act, and we had excellent speakers, Professor Stephen Gilbert, Miguel Amador, and Spencer Todd from the US. And we discussed a lot of things, and I hope you learn what you have to do to comply with the AI Act when it becomes applicable in 2 years' time. Enjoy.
I'm going to speak about the AI Act, implications for AI-enabled software as a medical device. You've already had a brief introduction. I'm Professor of Medical Device Regulatory Science at the Else-Kröner-Fresenius Center for Digital Health at the University in Dresden in Germany. I'm also advisor or consultant to Ada Health, which is a startup or scale-up company in the AI space in Berlin. And I'm also a consultant to the DG SaMD and DG Research and Innovation on related themes to this presentation. I often show this slide just at the start of my presentations, which is we live in an age in which regulation is interesting. I interact a lot with professors of clinical AI and professors of AI technology development. They all think regulation is dreadfully boring, and I like to make the point that it's actually the regulation which often makes the front pages of the newspapers. In this case, the Financial Times, which is my favorite newspaper, but I could have picked any leading newspaper, and even any not leading newspaper from all over the world, and regulation is on front cover. I work quite broadly in this space. This is kind of a last introduction slide, but if any of you are working in large language models in medical devices, we talked a little bit in the breakout session about large language models in quality management and regulatory, which is a bit different, but if you're working in large language models in medical device products, I'd recommend this paper in Nature Medicine, which we published in June last year, which has got a lot of attention, and also some of these other papers in related fields in the intersection of large language models and drug at the bedside drug approaches, and also approaches for guardrail development for large language models in decision support, including in cancer. So I'll shift on to the actual theme, which is starting off with the AI Act, when does it enter into effect? So it was passed by the Parliament on the 13th of March. It was adopted by the Council on the 21st of May. And then it will be, once it actually enters into effect, it becomes part of the law. Well, I'm sure you're all aware of this when it's published, formally published, or a certain small amount of time. I forget the actual amount of time. It's something like 24 hours, but maybe 2 days after it's published within the Journal of the European Union. So the clock starts ticking on that when it's actually published within the journal. That was anticipated to be July, and it's now expected to be August. That would actually be published, and then shortly afterwards it comes into effect as a law. Now that doesn't relate to the date of application for various different areas, which is a different date specified within the Act, but the clock starts ticking from the date at which it enters into effect, and then the time periods are all set 6 months later, a year later, 24 months later, 36 months later. So the black stuff is definite, it's historical, the red stuff could still shift in time. You can read the text. I'm sure you're already aware of this. You can download the adopted text, which was the text of the 13th of March on the European website. I'll try and put a link into this presentation when I share it. And then there's already a corrigendum published. The reason for that corrigendum is that this text is now effectively the law. There's only supposed to be legal grammatical checks, not linguistic grammatical checks, but legal grammatical checks and alignments. And where they actually find things that need to be fixed, they need to do a corrigendum. And that first corrigendum describes some of these relatively minor tidying up changes. I've actually not read it, if I'm being honest. Timelines we touched on before, and there was a mention of 24 months. And 24 months from the entering into force which is the formal term for coming into effect, but entering into force is this short period of time after it's published within the journal. There are time limits at 24 months, but I would argue that for most in this audience, it's actually the time limits after 36 months, which are critical. It's after 36 months that they are newly numbered Annex 1. The annexes have been renumbered in the final act with respect to the draft that was published. And Annex 1 includes those devices which are, typical AI as a medical device, AI-enabled software as a medical device, and that comes into effect 36 months after the date of entering into force. It does apply to Annex. Sorry, it says Annex 1. Actually, Annex 3 things. After the it says except Annex 1, so it's correct. It applies to Annex 3 things after 24 months, but I would suggest that very few of you are actually in an Annex 3 situation, but we'll come back to that later. Some of the other timelines shown in this slide, I won't go into detail. They relate to responsibilities for, well, maybe mentioning general performance AI comes in after 12 months for the requirements for it. Large-scale IT systems are kind of out of scope. There are various requirements of expected timelines for various different standards that are required, and then there are various review tasks that need to be carried out by the Commission, which are set at certain periods of time after effect. And I won't talk in this presentation about the overlap with the MDR review process, which is also ongoing and would be better if it aligned better with this process, but it aligns to a very small extent with this process. What are the theoretical implications? So I published a paper on this quite recently, which some of you may have seen. If not, it's open access and you can easily find it. The EU passes the AI Act, and its implication for digital medicine are unclear. It's published just over a month ago, 22nd of May. So it kind of seems a little bit like shrugging the shoulders and saying, well, everything is unclear. I wouldn't say everything is unclear, and actually the argument I make mostly concentrate on in this presentation is what is clear rather than what's not clear. But certainly there are quite a lot which is really unclear in terms of how we've already discussed. I can't remember in the breakout session or the session before, standards aren't really ready. When will notified bodies be ready? What is exactly the role of the AI office? What will interpretations be for general performance AI? How will sandboxes operate? There's a lot that's not known. The shrugging symbol also indicates that there's a lot that I don't know. Like there's a couple of hundred pages. It shifts quite a lot between different drafts. There's maybe things I'll get wrong, and there's certainly things that I wouldn't focus on of being of prime interest, which may be of prime interest to other people. So it's, we're all learning in this space. I'm happy to hear your views of what's more important. Within the paper, so I'll talk a very little bit about the paper and the tables in that. This is a very quick summary of new responsibilities of developers and deployers. So it's been touched on already that one of the, if we touch on new principles that are required, human agency and oversight, and Article 14 on oversight is new, but its implications in the end are not as large as people feared it would be. New requirements on the technical robustness and safety of AI systems, which one could argue overlap what anybody would have been doing in this space prior to the AI Act, but they're explicitly set out. New requirements on privacy and data governance. Again, one could argue that any company that's actually been bringing an AI to market would already be following equivalent approaches, including on the transparency. Transparency, maybe not so much, but that comes to the fore, and it's arguably not a huge step, provided you were actually following good processes in the first place. Equal access and the question of bias, cultural diversity is increasingly important, but it is yet to be seen what thresholds the Commission will put on that when products are actually brought to market, where they haven't been equally tested across different populations, but it's certainly a requirement and needs to be considered. And then I'll probably a little bit less to say about social and environmental well-being, but it's also in there. Transparency is emphasized a second time here. And then the most important point is that not only that under MDR, current regulations, for those that don't know it, everything which relates to risks of health and safety is already considered to a very extensive level for the entire product lifecycle, even though the AI Act and none of its guidelines mentions the term, the MDR and none of its guidelines mention the term AI once. Effectively, anybody bringing any software as a medical device to market had to consider risk assessment, risks to health, health and safety, medical device safety, medical device performance, medical device benefits. So the kind of safety side was in there. The fundamental rights and the extent to which that the AI Act is a human rights regulation was not considered so much, but responsible companies will have been doing this. Point 4 is a very interesting point, and I may not come back to that in the rest of the presentation, but it's really got quite high implications for general performance AI and those using large language models. The requirement the data sets, to the best extent possible, be complete and free of errors. Now, that's probably not too shocking to anybody working within standard deep learning, convolution neural networks, image analysis approaches, but when you bring it to large language models, it has quite interesting implications. Oversight I've touched on before, but Article 14 and oversight, I think it's still numbered Article 14, is where appropriate such measures to guarantee that the system is subject to built-in operational constraints that cannot be overridden and are responsive to the human operator. Now, this sounds like a very heavy requirement. In the first drafts of the AI Act, it was very, very heavy, but the revision process actually changed Article 14 to make it into something which is actually quite common sense from something that was almost excluding there being AI at all. I'll maybe skip this slide because I don't think so. Well, I'll go very quickly through it in the nature of time. There was quite a lot of pain points and very controversial points in the negotiation, and those that have been following this closely will know that the definition of AI was initially very controversial. It had a very broad initial definition that included anything that's really in the software as a medical device. Simple logic could have been defined as AI. They refined this to use the OECD definition effectively, and it's AI is those things which are using an algorithm based on inputs and data. They enable inference, and they have the capacity to infer in the training process of the model. There were some delays in the Act when, for obvious reasons, related to the launch of ChatGPT and the some from November 2022 implications of large language models, and those were understandable delays because nobody quite knew how to deal with it, and there was a lot of debate and different lobbying on different sides, and there are quite a number of provisions specifically for general purpose AI in the area, which relates to foundation models and to like large language models and so on, and the intersection of those. What is high risk was a very controversial point. It was initially a little bit unclear, and effectively, this relates to Annex 3 high risk, and this was seen as a bit overly stringent, not particularly in the healthcare case. And actually, very late in the revision, they introduced all of these exceptions to the application of Annex 3. Now, I don't think Annex 3, which relates to biometric systems, primarily applies to the people in this call. So I'm not going to focus too much on those dilutions in the AI Act, which came in the last days of its passing through the Parliament. If we consider just on a very high level, what are the practical considerations of what came out of the negotiations and what was passed? There's kind of a very interesting mix of classic product regulation, kind of regulation under the new legislative framework, and along with the regulation of a technology sector, which is not typically what the new legislative framework or classic product regulation deals with, but then also a mix of human rights and ethics regulation, and that's rolled into what some might consider a little bit of an untidy act. I consider it not too bad. If you compare it to the European Health Data Space, which is a real mess, the AI Act is actually relatively easy to follow. It applies to AI systems as a product. It applies to AI systems in safety components of products. It applies to general performance AI systems and general performance AI used in products broadly. It requires CE marking for high-risk AIs and requires conformity assessment. So that's linked to MDR conformity assessment. I'll come back to that. And Chapter 3 brings in requirements for high-risk systems, risk management, data governance, bias detection, clinical documentation, logging, transparency, human oversight and accuracy, robustness, and cybersecurity. I'll come back to these. So there's the Annex 7 full QMS route with notified body review, testing, access to models, training, and data compliance. Access to models is interesting, but the rest of this is not so new in many ways to those that are used to conformity assessment. It requires the involvement of notified bodies. That they will be, we touched on this in the breakout room. You will still have your MDR or IVDR, if you're a small number of people that might be in the IVD space, notified body, and they will receive additional codes for accreditation as general AI notified bodies under the AI Act, or that could be subcontracted. So if you're with a small notified body which doesn't yet get itself ready to receive those codes, or doesn't get awarded those by the assessment authority within their competent authority, usually the Ministry of Health, they could subcontract the general AI tasks to, let's say, a larger notified body. There are limited interfaces with the actual vertical product legislations or with GDPR. So that's a high-level summary. And I've got kind of 15 minutes I've spoken for, and there's kind of 15 minutes left if I speak for half an hour. I'm going to kind of come into a kind of series of kind of questions that I think people might ask as a way of introducing concepts. So the first one I've kind of answered already. Do I have missed out the word? Do I have to have a second notified body in conformity assessment? And you already have recognized the answer from the introduction. No, you don't. So it would be a single notified body, a single conformity assessment. It's a chance that would be subcontracted from your MDR notified body to AI notified body who has the appropriate codes if your notified body doesn't, but that could be effectively invisible to you. Second question, so I think I mentioned sandboxes on the way through, but sandboxes are an important part of the AI regulation and they become compulsory. And you could ask the question, they become compulsory, do I have to be in a sandbox? And the answer is, again, no. There's a little bit of confusion around this space, but it was sandboxes were always very much part of the draft of the AI Act and part of the discussions for the AI Act. And there's many examples of the term. If you search for the term sandbox, you find hundreds of examples throughout the text of the final Parliament passed version. But the compulsory aspect that was brought in the very last 24 hours or 36 hours of the negotiation relates to the nations, the member states. They have to create sandboxes and make sandboxes available. But as a company, it's optional of whether you go into a sandbox. And what a sandbox is, it says 21 months there. I've actually got a feeling it's 24 months, and I think that's a typo. So take that as 24 months. I'll correct the slides. Every member state must establish or must see established a system for sandboxes, and these sandboxes shall provide a controlled environment that fosters innovation and facilitates the development, training, testing, and validation of innovative AI systems for a limited time before they're being placed on the market or being put into service. Pursuant to a specific sandbox plan agreed between providers and the competent authority. Such regulatory sandboxes may include testing in real-world conditions supervised in the sandbox. So it's an important thing to mention here that sandboxes don't give you a CE mark. In fact, what you get out of a sandbox is a kind of certificate, which is kind of signed by the competent authority, which gives a proof of the activities that you undertook within the sandbox. And then that goes to the conformity assessment process, and they probably should take good account of that. But it's actually not formally written into the MDR, anything about this process. So there'll probably need to be associated guidance to notified bodies from MDCG and to manufacturers and to sandboxes from MDCG, etc. Next question. I did not need a notified body conformity assessment. What I mean by that is I did not need it under MDR or IVDR. Do I now need a notified body or conformity assessment? And the symbol here is, if you just don't recognize it, this is a CE mark that's involved in a third party. And actually what I mean here is a third party conformity assessment, to be quite clear. I probably should add that to the slides before I say them. So I did not need a notified body or third party conformity assessment. Do I now? This number represents the notified body number in a third-party conformity assessment process. And the answer is no. If you didn't need a notified body or third-party conformity assessment, you still don't. Now, that's a general no. There are very small exceptions to that. But if you didn't need a notified body now, if you didn't need a notified body before, you don't need a notified body now, because the the way that it works under Annex 1 of the AI Act is to say, did you need a notified body before? If yes, then you're going to be a high-risk health AI. So basically, you were Class 2A before or higher. You had to SUD or whoever doing your assessment. Then you also have to be assessed and have to apply all the conformity assessment chapters and technical documentation requirements of the AI Act. There's a special case exemption to that. If you were under Annex 3, so almost all of your use cases of every bit in this call and product intended purposes would be coming under Annex 1, intersecting with the AI Act. For a very, very small number of examples, it could be via biometrics requirements under Annex 3, who are using biometrics for ID in some way, which is quite unusual in a medical device. Or let's say you were using biometrics for emotion recognition in an application that detected depression through emotion. I don't even think that was the intention of the legislator here, or of the commission. I think they've captured that by mistake almost of that use case. But in this case, Annex 3 would apply, and you could be in a situation. It's very, very fleeting, small possibility that you were Class 1 before, because you were Class 1 software. Could get on to hold debate if that exists or not. I'd rather not, but theoretically you could have been considered in some countries a Class 1 software, and now you'd require under Annex 3 you'd be classified as high risk AI, and you'd need to have a conformity assessment. But that's such a tiny fraction of a % example. A little bit more detail in this. This is just the text from the Act in this case, of how Annex 1 applies, and this applies from 30 months from the date of entering into force. And then this paragraph 2 relates to the Annex 3 for high-risk systems, which are, there's a whole series of listed high-risk systems, but I can't see how any of the others in related to voting systems, etc., apply. So the one that is commonly stated that might apply is biometrics, but even there it's a bit fleeting. Next question. So I've 9 minutes left. If I have a MDR Class 2A AI-enabled software as a medical device on the market and certified by a German notified body, and I'm in a company that takes both their formal legal requirements and their social and ethical responsibilities seriously, am I doing it all already? And so do I have no real actions due to the AI Act? Yes, you're doing it all already. If you were in such a company, none of this is new to you, really. Arguably, you have slightly higher transparency requirements, but the reason I put in there that you were taking your social and ethical responsibilities seriously, you were actually already being transparent, not because you read within the AI Act or in the MDR that you must be, but quite a lot of companies have just already seen that if you're putting an AI on the market, you tell the people using it what it is. So you'd already be fulfilling that. You already know what risk management systems are. You already know what quality management systems are. You already know technical documentation. You have a very good technical documentation. You already have good data governance and bias detection in place. These things in the end were required under GDPR. You're already doing logging, because that would be something you would need to do in order to know how your systems are functioning. Transparency I've touched on. Human oversight, the way that the current Article 14 is written, that is something a responsible company would have had in place anyway. And you're already looking at robustness, and of course you're looking at cybersecurity, because it was, cybersecurity is not a new requirement that comes in under the AI Act. So have a party, get up the next day with a hangover, get on with your day-to-day slog and rewarding activity, which is continued quality management system compliance, regulatory compliance, the intelligent application of regulatory and quality principles, and the continuous improvement of your quality management system. Nothing is really new. I would argue, but you can disagree with me. The next question, with 7 minutes remaining, is can I use an adaptive self-learning AI approach in Europe and under the AI Act? And the answer here is yes. And what does it say about this within the AI Act? And this is new, and in my view, this is actually something where the AI Act is clearly enabling to what existed before. So the most relevant of these snippets to read, which is probably the first one directly under the yes, and it says, for high-risk AI systems that continue to learn after being placed in the market or put into service, changes to the high-risk AI system and its performance that have been predetermined by the provider at the moment of initial conformity assessment are part of the information contained in the technical documentation and shall not constitute a substantial modification under the AI Act. And those of you in Germany may know the IGNB informal checklist that all German notified bodies use. It's from the Interessengenossenschaft, I think, Genossenschaft of notified bodies in Germany. This is effectively the guidance for AI used in Germany, and Team NB, Team Notified Body across Europe, are going to kind of adopt this as a preliminary guidance before guidance is in place from any of the formal bodies and kind of a notified body level. And it used to state in 2022, static AI that has a learned and operates in a learned state is in principle certifiable. Dynamic AI, that's AI that continues to learn the field, is not certifiable in principle, as the system must be verified and validated amongst other things, and that functionality must be validated against intended use. And the effect of the AI Act, which was published as a draft, and the discussions around that led an update in 2023, and in the final version 2024 of this guide, sorry, not final version, version 5.1 or something. They'll continue to update it. In the case of learning software systems, the process for learning generally changes the performance of the device. Such changes, if they exceed a certain level, have to be considered as significant changes and require a new conformity assessment, which again has to be performed before placing the device into the market. So that's a notified body way of saying, yes, it's allowed, but only. We're going to be a bit awkward about it. We're going to look at it in detail, but essentially, yeah, shifting from cannot be certified to can be certified, but it's hard. You wouldn't expect anything less from a notified body. I want to get very limited time to talk about what predetermined change control plans are and software as a medical device pre-specification. But those of you that have been active on the US side will know this, that from the FDA's software as a medical device action plan and subsequent activities. And the kind of as an old model where you design and build your medical device, AI-based medical device under a fully documented quality management system. You acquire clinical data on the fixed model. You submit that to a regulator and you get a decision on a fixed AI model. And then you can retrain based on market-based results or further data sets, and you kind of have to go back and resubmit your system. You may have to acquire new clinical data from studies. You'll always have to provide some kind of clinical data as a basis of an argument, or certainly very sophisticated bench data, and you have to you start the process again. And according to the FDA action plan, which has also kind of been adopted as an approach effectively by the MHRA in the UK, you can kind of change this approach, and you define a algorithm change protocol, software as a medical device pre-specification, and a predetermined change control plan. And then you would have the kind of thresholds, the envelope approved of what the range of performance, how much your device could change, which is quite hard to do in practice. And then any changes which are beyond this or which modify your intended purpose would require reapproval. So that's the overall concept. And I published a couple of papers. This is the last couple of minutes on this, just exploring this case back in 2021, and then exploring continuous improvement in digital health applications in 2023, and describing, that it's theoretically possible, or under these frameworks to consider a kind of a continuous release process, where you have a process where you're doing continuous monitoring. On the basis of doing continuous monitoring, which is hard to do, but we discuss it in the paper, you implement continuous improvements in your software as a medical device. You bring those forward with improvements. Continuous improvement could be things about your usability, your retraining on data, your model refinement. You bring that forward in a continuous approval process. And you have automated internal software as code, regulation as code approaches to effectively even deliver continuous delivery, which is a bit of an unknown thing within the regulatory space even at the moment. And then that would enable things like differential product release and A/B testing. It's worth reading the paper. The paper got quite a lot of attention. So there's lots of promise in this space, and much of that promise was discussed in the FDA action plan in this space, and also in the MHRA plans. When it actually came out as the first FDA guidance in this space, which you can read, it's draft guidance actually rather than full guidance. It's from April 3rd, 2023. So this is the US, but it's kind of what we could expect from this space in Europe. I would imagine it'd be it's much the same as this guidance. It was kind of a little bit of a disappointment in that a lot of things discussed within the action plan talked about approaches that would enable continuous development. And in reality, what is actually enabled, according to the FDA guidance, which I would anticipate is the same as the European approach in this space, was much more in the realm of in-house following standard design controls and highly anticipated to be manual, relatively slow processes, but skipping out the step where in the FDA system you had to go back and have a reapproval process with the FDA and allowing that to go within your design threshold, but with careful design controls. Now, I would anticipate that over time this moves more in the direction of allowing continuous delivery. I've asked regulators, certainly in the UK, about this, and their answer is, we'll do it step by step, give it time. It's not formally absolutely excluded, but people at the moment would expect that you're not quite doing continuous delivery. You're taking things a little bit of a step back from that and doing quite manual processes and quite slow processes, but internal processes to have your updated version of your algorithm within your threshold, your pre-specification. Okay. That's just a comment on this space, and let's just stop this. I'm at time, but sometimes people kind of have the view that it's either static or adaptive, but this intermediate case of kind of batch frequent release is, in the end, in my experience, what most companies want to do. So I'll skip that. And then this slide, which actually is from a RAPS, Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, where I was speaking on a panel about this AI Act and its intersection with MDR, and this is kind of just a cloud of thoughts, of discussion points that might come up.
So that brings us to the panel session, and I'm super excited to have three great panelists. So first of all, Stephen, who just gave the fantastic presentation. The second person is Miguel, and then we have Dr. Spencer Todd from the US, and our sponsor today. So he's more than welcome. Please, Miguel and Spencer, please introduce yourselves in a couple of sentences.
So I'm a biomedical engineer, regulatory geek. I've been working with adaptive regulation from the time of stem cells now into AI. At Complear, we are building a product lifecycle management tool for digital health. So going from medical devices, data privacy, all the 20 or 30 regulations that you just need to survive to as a developer. And in a nutshell, bringing in this topic because we just put together a consortium to the European Commission to support on the implementation of the sandboxes. So and also on the setup of the testing facilities that will be a new thing for software, at least in this, that will give a bit more clarity on if it's good quality or not, mainly to support the competent authorities on the surveillance of the market. So we hope that the centralized approach to AI Act pretty much does not complicate things like MDR did.
Okay, thank you so much. Spencer.
Thanks all. Yeah, so I'm Spencer Todd. So as mentioned, I was at the FDA for a while, worked for a big medical device manufacturer for years doing MDR, MDD, FDA, NMPA submissions. So I also founded Formly, which is software to essentially help small startup medical device companies do their CE marking, create their processes and documentation using AI. I am not an AI expert, but have helped a few AI standalone software devices get on the market under MDD and MDR. So just excited to be here today to give my perspective where I can, and excited to talk about the AI Act.
If I had to give a yes or no answer, the answer would be yes. But if I'm allowed to go a bit wider than that, to some extent, we had this question in our breakout session. The main problem with the MDR impairing regulation, impairing innovation, in my view, was an implementation problem. So not solely. Many of you are probably aware that there's some act from Peter Liza, I think, within the Parliament, EU parliamentarian, to actually move for revision to certain aspects of MDR to take out certain requirements. And the Commission has actually, there's kind of been a leak of a Commission report of the idea of a central MDR unit within the Commission, a little bit like the AI office. And there are some moves afoot to kind of reduce the MDR impairing of innovation within the EU, which is partly related to requirements, partly related to implementation. I think the implementation problems could affect with the AI Act. So much from the concrete effect of the AI Act will depend on what the AI office does. So the AI office is a really interesting role. So on one side, it's supposed to be exploring and promoting and enabling the growing out of general purpose AI and large language models and generative AI within Europe. On the other hand, in terms of its research activities, on the other side, it's going to be kind of policing these activities and implementing the AI Act. So much depends on the standards, so much depends even more on the guidance, and so much depends on the enforcement. I am doing a consultation for the Commission with DG Research and Innovation and DG, so Director General Santi Health, on the intersection between the AI Act and the MDR as part of its scope, and actually looking at living labs and sandboxes and exploring to what extent approaches can be used to try and stop the impairment of innovation and actually promote innovation. So I don't want to overblow the importance of that. Everybody I meet these days is doing some kind of consultation for the Commission, but I intend to make mine an impactful piece of work.
Spencer and Miguel, would you agree with that? Because I often hear this sentiment from the techies like myself that the US is leading with everything AI, China is leading with manufacturing and just producing a lot of things, and Europe is leading and holding everything back with regulations. Would you agree with that?
If I can jump on here, so I struggle still a lot with MDR, especially on the maturity of the ecosystem to understand what is doing good software as medical devices. So we lack a culture of that. So the issue with MDR was not just a regulation, it's just we were not ready for that. We as a company, we have a fight of stealing people from notified body, they come and steal someone from us. So it means that where's are the expert people that know how to do medical device software? And a lot of the challenge on going with the AI Act, I still struggle for people to understand what is a clinical evaluation for a software, or just doing cybersecurity basics, or literally doing traceability. These kind of basic things, and that for me will be the challenge on AI. We are regulating on top of industry that is not ready yet for all the requirements that is in TISA. So this is my main concern in Europe. I prefer to see the approach in the US, where they go more like step by step, pushing guidance, testing, improving the maturity of the ecosystem. Eventually, they'll start banning or not accepting things that were not fully compliant. We are a bit on the reverse sides of just putting a rule, and then we need to figure out how to make it. And I was just telling on my intro, these testing facilities we're literally working with which standards should be harmonized. How do we implement and test these standards? Because there is no information to the AI office at this moment, and we need to do this kind of work in the next 2 years. So there is a lot of things that will be undefined still. What the sandboxes will be, also a challenge that we've been asked to support the AI office and the European Commission. So that's a balance. We are regulating before knowing what's really how to implement it, and this will be a struggle because both we don't know how to do it as a society, and we don't know how to do it as manufacturers. There's still a lot of education that needs to be put in place.
Indeed. Spencer, anything to add, or shall we go to the next question?
Just quickly, I mean, I'll agree. I think on paper, there's ways to reduce redundancies and make it work, but as Stephen mentioned, it's all about implementation. And I want to be optimistic, but given the current state of MDR, it's kind of hard to be sometimes. So I guess it's kind of we'll wait and see.
So there are no harmonized standards for AI under the MDR or AI Act. So formally, there are none that need to be applied. And what do you do in a situation where there are no harmonized standards? Well, it's quite clear under the MDR and AI Act, you fall back on the state of the art. And there are state of the art documents which are relevant to follow. So The IGMB checklist I mentioned, that's going to be, as far as I know, that's going to be adopted by the notified bodies. So you kind of can see what the checklists the notified body assessors in this space are going to use to assess you. And they've been doing that for a number of years within Germany. So that's obviously a document you want to refer to, and it's highly general. You could interpret it many ways, but you'd want to certainly deal with that. There is a British standard. There's a slight chance I get the number wrong, but it's BR 34189 on risk assessment. So it's a technical report rather than a full standard technical report on the applying medical device risk management approaches to AI devices. Turpin, I've forgotten his first name, Rob Turpin was involved in the BSI, along with BSI, which is British Standards. Agency, I said BS, BR, it's BS, British Standard. It's also an AIMI standard, and that's been recognized by the FDA as a standard. So you could make a very strong argument that in terms of risk assessment processes, that's one you want to follow. Then there are a whole raft of standards that Miguel will know better than me, which relate to health software, health IT systems. And in a case where later there are harmonized standards, you'll have to follow the harmonized standards for medical devices. But lacking those, you'd want to follow the standards in the place for health software, health IT systems, bioinformatics systems, etc., biomedical systems. And I couldn't list all of those off. I'd need to look up some separate slides for them. But they don't formally apply. Nothing is harmonized.
If I can jump here on the practical notes, just follow FDA guidances. So more and more we see most of the main countries to have quite aligned on medical devices scope. US, UK, Canada, Europe, Australia, even Brazil in the loop. So a lot of the even the technical documentation structure is being put first on the on this international group, and then pass it to the national regulations. So the guidance from FDA are not just inventions from FDA just because they have 100 engineers working in digital software. Well, probably you don't have any in the competent authorities in Europe that can produce this kind of work, or at least in the majority of them. So in that sense, those guidance are quite more practical, and if you comply with them, honestly, you are complying with most will be the new standards coming along. Then it will be easy just to do a small gaps if anything changes, but the principles are there. Even tools on which metrics to use for AI models. FDA has a tool to help you to select the best metrics for validation of AI tools. So these kind of topics, quite more scientific, this is the main challenge. This is mostly engineering in the end. The regulatory part is pretty easy. How you prove that the AI is not biased, that is a tough work as engineer.
Stephen?
So I just want to echo the point on Miguel made. There's the also in terms of FDA and Health Canada and MHRA, which I would say is international state of the art, which is good machine learning practice approaches, a set of rules and a set of wider guidance. IMDRF, International Medical Device Regulators, recently effectively co-opted those documents in as well. That doesn't mean they apply in law to the AI Act, but they're certainly the wider state of the art, and until the standards exist following that, you put you in good stead. And also I mentioned it for predetermined change control plans, exactly following the draft US standard, US guidance would be an approach to take to predetermined change control plans if you want to do that. And I would suggest anybody who wants to, notified bodies will already consider those. All the major notified bodies have already experience in dealing with those. Construct it like you construct it for the FDA, and then follow their feedback.
Yeah, it's a good question. As far as triaging in this specific use case, I'm not 100% on that. I think that, when it comes to this ban prohibitive AI, they have a full list, and that's what's going to be, I think, implemented first. Stephen, Miguel, I don't know if you have that specific use case in mind when it comes to actual chest x-rays specifically. Go ahead, Stephen.
So if I understood the question correctly, it was about using an AI to make a decision in the relatively easy case of clear negatives without human in the loop. And I think you could, so I'm not 100% certain in this, but I'll give you my best answer. If you took the original published draft the way that Article 14, which I mentioned several times in my presentation, which is human oversight, was written, I would have interpreted the original wording of Article 14 to preclude that use case, because you had to have a situation that was worded that you had human oversight that could step in all cases. And there was extensive lobbying, interaction, redrafting. I actually submitted several drafts myself through a major company and through COSIR to Article 14. My suggested wording didn't make it into the Act, but I was one of many that were making suggestions. And Article 14 has been substantially revised. And Article 14 now has a much more general wording. And the requirements, like I could put them on screen or a shared screen again, but like high-risk AI systems shall be designed and developed in a way, including with appropriate human-machine interface tools, that they can be effectively overseen by natural persons during the period in which they are at use. Now, you could still interpret that. Does that mean for every single case of which they're in use, or does that mean when they're in use? And I would take it from reading the previous versions and having commented on them and discussed them at length with people, that wording is more general than that. It means when it's in use. It doesn't mean in every patient. It doesn't mean you have a human there such that AI doesn't exist. The original wording of Article 14, you could say there is no such thing because every AI needs a one-on-one human involved in the decision-making loop for high-risk systems. And my reading of that would be that it's not excluded, at least under Article 14, and I can't think of another area of the law that excludes it. But definitely read Article 14 carefully and build your product strategy addressing Article 14 in a very, very serious way, because that's exactly what your AI and MDR notified body are going to take you to task on. What are your oversight approaches to say when your algorithm fails that you don't have thousands of patients going to being told they're a clear negative without a human in the loop and dying? How do you address that question of failure of your algorithm? There's so many mechanisms of failure, so that's what I would focus on. If I had to answer the question, is it a bit harder post AI Act? Maybe. I know of software companies that were aiming to develop exactly what you describe. So AI screening purely on the case of a clear negative, bringing a human in the loop where there's a more complex decision. I know of products that were late in the development process, but I'm actually never been certain that one of those, I've never gone back to check the ones I knew that were late in the development process, to go back to check if any of them actually were on market with a class 2A, class 2B, or even class 3, but it's unlikely. CE mark, maybe you can answer that question. Are there actually currently products on market in that use case?
Yes, there is one product on market. It's Exhibit.
Is that from Eastern Europe, Serbia, or not Serbia? Sorry,
no. It's either Estonia or yeah.
Okay, so it's probably the same one that I had been in some contact with them at their late approval stage, but I hadn't actually seen them being on market. So that's already a pretty challenging case to get approved, and it maybe is a step harder. But I don't think I haven't seen a specific exclusion where it says in black and white that is banned. It's more deal with Article 14 in a very proactive and responsible way.
Yeah, thank you.
In probably a more technical aspects of this. So first of all, I was speaking with Stefan the other day about this classification of software, and this is a good example of something that usually will be a class 3, but we still see notified bodies approving as class 2A, class 2B on these autonomous diagnosis tools. So it's literally fits on the class 3 loop. Of course, then there is this. Oh, this is a triage, not the final diagnosis. But if it's a negative, you are diagnosing someone. So it's still a lot of lack of guidance, because our dear regulators left us with a small sentence in the middle of MDCG that points to a class 3, but with a really extreme case where it does not cover probably the different variants. But moving in is kind of oversights. This is we don't expect, of course, to be forbidden something that is the basis of most of AI softwares, like autonomous triage, this kind of remote monitoring tools, for instance. All of them have a kind of negative diagnostic in a sense. So when we speak of these oversights, this boils down to transparency requirements. A lot of how can you make sure that you present enough information for the user to understand how reliable is this system. So what is intended is to avoid this black box kind of outputs that you are not able to understand, that you cannot rely on that negative, because that is probably not, there is some degrees of failure, or something that's, you can be the human in the loop as a patient, let's just say. The other part, and it's something that's we see more and more, and this concept of life cycle is something probably new for medical device manufacturers, in the sense that you don't release the software and just go home. You need to really connect your software to your, and you need to monitor it. So like Stefan was saying, how do you monitor if your AI system is drifting, if it's not performing as expected? So one person can die, but you need to make sure that you are able to act as soon as possible to avoid it to kill another person, this kind of thing. And I think killing, in a sense, that is probably, that's adverse event reporting, but really understanding how it failed beyond performance, and this kind of drifting, monitoring, these kind of tools, it will be a requirement. We see this much more involved in the US. At least there is a lot of software tools to monitor AI. So in Europe, I still see a lot of people doing paper-based documentation. So it's a different mindset we need to move. So we need really software to manage software in the end. And this is a bit when the human in the loop comes into detecting things as early as possible. But again, this is the kind of guidelines we need. Otherwise, it's just discussing identified bodies' opinions.
Thanks for listening. I hope you learned something, and please give feedback that we need to improve the meetups. Thank you so much, and see you next time.